Who dat to everybody? Welcome to the Who Dat Confessional podcast, where we've hit 751. We're just gonna keep going. We're just gonna keep the show going for as long as possible. Maybe one day we'll make 1,000 episodes. That would be pretty cool, right? I mean, I think that'd be pretty dope. So we'll see if we can get there. Until then, we're going to talk about some of the changes that are happening around the NFL. Obviously, talking New Orleans Saints with our big topics. At least I consider these the big topics. We'll see if chat agrees. Our live chat often has a way of misdirecting us. And yeah, I'm blaming chat. I'm a toxic content creator. What can I say? We're going to talk about the NFL banning hip drop tackles, what Cameron Jordan had to say about that, new kickoff rule, and why L'Jarius Sneed's trade means the New Orleans Saints have to keep Confessional Lattimore. You just simply cannot move on from him based on if this is what the criteria for a trade or the value of a trade is set, then you stick with that and don't even worry about moving him at all. So, yeah, we'll talk about that and a few different other things. Obviously, we are worried about Ryan Ramczyk and how that's working out. Obviously, people are worried about the surgery to Chase Young. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to talk about here as we're getting close to April and the NFL draft is right around the corner. So, get ready, get excited, everybody. Who dat to Lester, Antonio, JJ Martin, Mark, Jean-Marie, everybody else, TJ, Billy Oshie, the moderators who are back there always lurking, always helping out. Appreciate everybody who comes to the streams, especially on the lives, because, well, there's nothing like being here live. It's great to listen to podcasts after the fact, and if you are one of those folks doing it, just know that you're appreciated. But also, it's pretty dope that we have the type of community where we can come here, hang out together, talk about all these topics, and just go on from there. So let's start with the hip drop tackles being banned. This is something that a lot of people were talking about, and you saw a lot of backlash from players against getting rid of them. But as we've seen, Cameron Jordan's going to be one of the most vocal people about it. And he had a simple response. He threw up one of the classic memes of flags on the play. And he basically anticipates, well, I think a lot of people anticipate, which is going to be a lot of penalties over this, said it was D-U-M-B, dumb. And everyone knows it. Watch how you hit a quarterback, can't hit anyone over the middle. Now watch how you tackle. Talking about how difficult it is to be a defensive player in the NFL with all the rules seemingly there to benefit and protect the offensive players. Now, I understand why people are talking about hip drop tackles. And it comes down to some major injuries. You know, when you have big injuries to marquee players for the NFL, they tend to make moves that protect those type of players. We've seen the Tuck rule with Tom Brady. We've seen a lot of different rules come through that protect superstars that are making the NFL money. And do not be misled. That's what it comes down to. And I'm not saying that the NFL is rigged, because anybody that follows the show knows I don't believe that. But the NFL absolutely will make moves in their financial benefit if they believe that, say, keeping Taylor Swift around will help them with a new demographic, or, banning hip drop tackles to protect some star players they have that they don't want to get injured, say some big name tight ends and stuff and big name quarterbacks, all these other things. But they're going to do that. And if those don't show to have any effect or work, or there's enough backlash, they backtrack from it. Which kind of brings me to the second point of rule changing here in today's episode, is that you do have a change to the NFL kickoff rules that was made unanimously. Now, when we say unanimously, we mean like everybody who voted agreed, and that is moving the touchback from the 35-yard line back to the 30. So it was, back in the day, you would see it, launch out and you'd have to actually run back these. So now it makes kicking teams have more options, and it hopefully provides a little bit more parity to the game. Now keep in mind that this was passed by the NFL Competition Committee unanimously. Now it has to go through the owners. So if the owners push it, then you got it. I think overall it's a better move. Is it great? I don't tend to like the moves that the NFL have made in a while. I think that what you see here are just basic things to placate certain groups. And when I say certain groups, I'm more referring to what I just mentioned earlier, like the financial side of the NFL and, the way that they, put forth their appearance of, oh, we care about concussions, except they care about concussions, then they go add another game to the schedule and want to add another game to the schedule, right? So It's always one of those things where they say one thing, but is it the whole truth and nothing but the truth? It often is not. That doesn't mean that there isn't some truth to it, but the way that they often sell things is not completely accurate. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing with some of these more recent changes. We're starting to see that's not no that's not how it is. That's not beneficial. When you see all these players from both sides of the ball coming out saying that this is pointless, well, I think that speaks for itself. We'll see how this progresses down the road. Antonio, good to see you. James Griffon, Jerry G, Rudy Rock, everybody else. Thanks, Garcia, Allen. Who dat to all y'all? I love our followers coming in. Can you not onside kick with this rule change? So the onside, again, none of that has been voted on yet. Now, I don't believe that passed the competition committee. I do know we talked about it. I will follow up and verify that here while we're talking. But the main kickoff rule is called the hybrid kickoff rule. Makes touchbacks that go into the end zone come out to the 30-yard line rather than the 35. So it's really based off the XFL's rules. If y'all have not followed much of minor league football, it's basically based off what the XFL does with a quote unquote trying to remove or limit the amount of concussions and other major injuries from returns. Even though statistically they're not really giving out many injuries or anything, they're not happening like that. At the same time, I understand why you do want to be safe, because I'm definitely not going to argue against safety. And the bigger, stronger, faster these players become, the more likely it is that they injure each other as they hit each other, because football is a violent contact sport, and it's not how it was 50, 60 years ago. No offense to any of the old heads here. I'm not trying to say that players back then weren't entertaining or weren't great for their era, but there's a reason that offensive linemen used to be 260 pounds, and they were huge back then. And now an offensive lineman can be 330. There's simply a difference when we're talking about physics. When somebody hits you who is 225, 5'11", and he's running at, say, 18 miles an hour, that is significantly more force than an old school running back who might have been 175 or 180, maybe 190, who hits you going 16 miles an hour. There's simply a huge disparity there. And you actually can measure that. It's called a Newton. That's what you use to measure force. So as that happens and as the players get better and better as being athletes, and this is for all leagues, you do run into the potential of there being more problems, especially in a physical sport like football. So I understand on paper wanting to do things that reduce injuries. Makes sense. But are we really doing that with some of these moves? We'll see. I am personally not there. We'll see. Again. So I do want to, because I told you I'd follow up Roz. We were doing a surprise onside kick eliminated with the new kickoff rule. Now, again, this was by the competition committee. I don't believe this has been passed by the owners yet. However, this would eliminate things like ambush that happened in the Super Bowl against the Colts, where you are limited to when you can do a onside kick. So I think that it either passed or it needs to pass. The owners' meeting is this week. And actually, it might have been Monday. Actually, it might have been yesterday. So this actually should have gotten passed already, which now limits when you can actually do the onside kick. So there is the strategy part of it. There's also the squib kick side of things where you could still maybe do some of those. But a lot of the elements of these special teams games seem to be getting removed slowly and slowly out of the NFL. And I really hope that's not the case. But you are right, Jimbo. I just looked at they did actually went ahead and passed this one. And again, I am not trying to argue against safety in the NFL. Obviously, I want safety in the NFL. But what I am saying is that everything that we are seeing make headlines, I don't know if I believe it is the best move for the NFL as a whole. But we'll just continue to monitor, because we could see this be put into practice and actually be fine. But I personally love the idea of a surprise onside kick in the second quarter. I don't understand why that's a negative. I don't understand what we're really hurting by having that as an option, because onside kicks are already incredibly hard to recover. Surprise onside kicks give you a little bit better of a chance, hence the term surprise, but statistically, it doesn't actually give you much more of a chance. Removing it just doesn't feel like it's helping anything, but that is one of our new rule changes. So we'll see how it plays out this year. I personally am hoping that these small rules to change where the ball comes out to encourages more actual kick returns. I mean, I personally am not a big fan at all of touchbacks and just kicking out of the end zone. I think that we should have parity and there should be value in special teams. I realize that not everybody might agree with that, but you look at it through the years. For example, kick returns and kickoffs, touchbacks. You go back to 2009. That was the Super Bowl year, obviously, but that was Thomas Morstead's rookie year. Now, why do I bring up that? His rookie year, he did the kickoffs. And not only did he do the kickoffs, by the way, he did a lot of things. And I am so proud that man's still in the league, and he's an all-time Saints great. I wish they wouldn't have got rid of him, but they did. But anyway, the point I wanted to get to was when he was in charge of doing the kickoffs, he had 27 touchbacks and 101 kickoff attempts. That's 26% of his kicks touchbacks. By comparison, last year with the Denver Broncos, Will Lutz, former New Orleans Saints, 71 touchbacks, 87.7% of his kickoffs touchbacks. So you're talking about literally over tripled the amount of touchbacks from like 2009 with Morstead to what Will Lutz did last year in terms of a percentage. You've essentially taken it out of the game. And Morstead did get better as his career went on. For example, in 2011, he actually had 64% of his were touchbacks. And then in the 2012 year where he made the Pro Bowl, 50% of them. But still nowhere near 80, almost 90%. And that's simply one player. That's not everybody else, right? Like that's because he stopped doing kickoffs back in like 2017. If y'all remember, they stopped. So he had an injury in like the end of 2015, didn't come back till 2017, and they stopped having him do kickoffs. He just did solely punting. So you see like just this huge change in how the New Orleans Saints and how other teams around the league are approaching special teams. And it feels like they're diminishing it to the point of, do we even bother with it? I still think punting has more value than we see with kickoffs because there aren't as many rules for punting to stop those things. But I still feel like just generally speaking, it's not fun anymore. By the way, for those curious, Blake Groupie, who handled the kickoffs for New Orleans last year, 84%. That's a rookie kicker. 84% of his were just touchbacks, not even returned. It takes away a lot of the fun of the game to me personally. That's maybe just me. Who dat to you, Rose City? Good to see you. So I wonder what JT Gray thinks of the rule change. I mean, most special teams aces are pretty against a lot of these new changes. They've been pretty vocal about it, and it's not just with the New Orleans Saints where you see Cameron Jordan being vocal. You look around the league, there are a lot of players who think a lot of these moves are silly. Whether we're talking about the drop tackle or we're talking about some of these moves where you have maybe a small move in the right direction where you change the touchback from the 35 to 30, but then you have a weird rule which just really eliminates a lot of the potential value of special teams where you get rid of surprise onside kicks. So just some odd moves that we see them making. They did Cam during the fourth quarter. What you talking about, Tay-Doc, with your Cam Jordan comment? But there's the news. Now, the big one I want to personally hit on, L'Jarius Sneed's trade means that New Orleans should definitely not trade Marshon Lattimore. To be clear, I don't believe they were going to trade him unless there was a very good offer on the table. With that, I believe that Marshon Lattimore has never been like on the trade block, but they were one of those like, hey, if you want to make an offer, you can make an offer. So at no point during this offseason do I believe, and I could be wrong, but I don't believe they have ever had him on the trading block. They've never been like just openly saying, hey, we're getting rid of Lattimore. You might as well come get him or somebody else gets him like they tried to do or did do with C.J. Gardner-Johnson. He was just one of those where like they made it to where if they wanted to make a move, they could. They have so far opted not to. And at this point, I would say you just simply can't justify doing it because I would argue L'Jarius Sneed is about the same value as Marshon Lattimore, and he went for a third-round pick. That's it. Technically a third round and a swap of seventh-round picks. But the third-round pick he went for is next year's third round. It's not even this year's third round. that the Chiefs are getting. They're getting next year's third round, which is fine. Third rounds are still valuable. But you're not even going to get any immediate value for L'Jarius Sneed. You're going to have to wait a year to get any form of value to see what you end up getting. Yes, I realize that a draft pick has a set value just by itself, but you're not going to see that value for a year. And if I was the New Orleans Saints and that's the offer, yeah, just absolutely not. Don't worry about it. We're good. We'll just sit here and chill and appreciate you for your time, appreciate you for your offer, and just pass. But I'm one of those players, I'm one of those fans. I like L'Jarius Sneed. I think he's a good player. I don't know if his highs are as good as Lattimore. There is one thing that he's had recently, and that's health. So that's very valuable. I do feel like L'Jarius Sneed is a very good defensive player. To give y'all some analytics, because I know y'all like analytics. Who doesn't like analytics? Here's how he rated last year. Last year, he allowed 0 touchdowns through the air, 56 quarterback rating when targeted, and only allowed 51% of the passes thrown his way to be completed while getting 2 interceptions, and he was targeted 100 times. So, he played very well. And if that gets you a third, you might as well just keep your player. Now, if you're the Chiefs, there's a little bit more to this logic because the Chiefs didn't want to pay him. Why do I say that? Well, if you look when he's getting traded, I think it's quite clear. They did not want to devote a high-end contract to him. He had just completed 4 years with them, right? Now, I personally love him because he's out of Louisiana Tech, but just had him for 4 years, drafted him in the 4th round, and they were about to have to give him a major contract because he was playing at a high level. And the Chiefs were like, nah, we got a $500 million quarterback and other things to pay for, like a very expensive 3-tech, so we're going to trade L'Jarius Sneed out. And we can definitely debate the value of doing that, but they made a choice. They said, we're going to go with Chris Jones up front, and that's where the majority of our money is going to go, not into L'Jarius Sneed. So that could have, made the trade for L'Jarius Sneed a little bit tougher because the team would have to be committing to a big contract. But even then, Lattimore's already got a big contract, big-ish, so really isn't too different. Either way, if you're the New Orleans Saints, I think at this point, it's very clear, no, don't trade him. Unless you just manage to break the market and get a first round. And as we looked at when we talked about this a couple weeks ago, we went through all the different trades of cornerbacks. You go back a couple years, you do see cornerbacks getting traded for more value than that. But you also, at the very same time, see very good cornerbacks going for a third. So we will just have to wait and see who ends up being the winner of that one. I think one thing for me is the age argument. Even though he was in his 4th year, one thing about L'Jarius Sneed is he's already 27. It's like he came into the league a little bit later, whereas Jones, he's basically the same age. I think he's 29, so he's 2 years older, but he's also an All-Pro, 5-time Pro Bowler. I mean, he's a force, right? And he just came off a season of 10-plus sacks. So even though he is a couple years older, I would argue he's better for his position than L'Jarius Sneed is in his, even though L'Jarius Sneed is a very good, I would argue, underrated corner. And it's probably tough to say a guy is underrated when he's on a, Super Bowl winning team. Sneed's got 2 rings, but he gets overshadowed by more popular names, the Kelsey, the Mahomes, the Jones, the Tyreek Hills when they're there. And he was never really that superstar name that everybody really hyped up. Well, he was still really good, but he was also with a lot of other big names. And I would argue that, especially now at the retirement of Aaron Donald, Chris Jones is now the premier 3-tech in the league with other good 3-techs out there. But I would say Chris Jones is the guy. Like, he's the main. If you talk about the interior pass rusher who has the most value in today's NFL, he's currently that until it is no longer him. So we'll see how that plays out for the Chiefs. Can't really argue much against them because they've managed to bring home 3 titles. Must be nice. Yeah, but 3 titles in the past, 5 years? Technically went to 4 of those Super Bowls in the past 5 years. Yeah. And I'm not mad. Just wish the Saints would have got him. But anyway, it is what it is. So, I mean, no matter what they do, it's really hard to argue the Chiefs are making bad moves because they continue to have success. And shout out to them for having success. But when you make certain financial decisions, that can hurt you in other ways or force you to make moves that maybe others wouldn't make. Now, if you are the Kansas City Chiefs, no worries. You have other corners like Boyd Doe, who they had as one of their backups. They also have got Joshua Williams. They got a couple of guys over there. So I think they'll probably be fine until they're not. But guys, they went to 4 Super Bowls in 5 years. Hard to critique that. I wish that I could have that problem. Like, oh no, my team who just won the Super Bowl traded our star cornerback. Oh, boo-hoo. Yeah, I can't really think about that. But it be like that sometimes. Either way, for the New Orleans Saints, now your focus needs to shift to keeping what you have, building on it, as Dennis Allen talked about a couple weeks ago, and trying to, in my opinion, get even better through the draft, through what's left of free agency. I feel like the Saints historically have been very, very good at getting, I would call, value free agents, guys who are role players or starters. You know, you don't necessarily rely on the big names in the first week. I still like who they ended up picking up early on, honestly. I feel like good moves have been made. We'll see what they end up making in the draft with guys like, Keon Coleman, wide receiver, coming in for a visit, and then bringing in guys like Chase Young, Gay. I mean, clearly trying to put talent and youth back into their, very aging defensive unit. So we'll see how it plays out. But you definitely need to win the division. Don't worry about the Kansas City Chiefs. Even though I really wish I had my home. Really do. Sucks. Damn you, Sean Payton. Damn you straight to heck. Damn you straight to heck. But Falcons, looking good. Bucks, annoying, but they're there. Then we got the Carolina Panthers. Got to worry about our division. And right now, on paper, if you pick the Falcons, I'm not mad at you. I would say the Falcons and the Saints are very, eerily similar. That they're almost in identical situations. They're literally in almost identical situations. I mean, they've done great jobs to address positions of need. They don't have long-term answers at various positions like quarterback, but they are in the same division we are, built in the same way. Like, they have a head coach that hard to believe in him being a huge winner, but guess what? Same thing in New Orleans. They've got a quarterback who's aging and is mostly a bridge guy at this point, but is still talented. Yeah, well, so does New Orleans. And they have a young set of, really good players, maybe not necessarily high-end stars who are up-and-comers, that we'll see what happens when they get a good OC, and potentially they have gotten that. Just like New Orleans. It's eerily similar. The only real difference is I have more confidence in Dennis Allen's defense than I do in Atlanta's. That's really the main difference. I feel offensively there's just as many questions as well as potential answers that have happened in Atlanta as have happened in New Orleans. It just really comes down to, can DA make sure that his defense stays top 5? And if so, then I pick New Orleans to win the division. If they have a falling out and you see the defense, really drop off, I don't see the New Orleans Saints winning the division. This is definitely a defense team. And if this team cannot win with their defense, even though I have been one of the, I would like to say that I was probably one of the first people mentioning Clint Kubiak to the New Orleans Saints and how much I felt that could be a beneficial move for them. Like, I was one of those early guys. As much as I like and believe in him, absolutely don't believe that he can just take this team with a bad defense and lead them to the division title in the playoffs. So we'll see what they end up doing. As far as what the New Orleans Saints are doing for their top 30 visits, they've had Keon Coleman out of Florida State, wide receiver. They've had defensive tackle Christian Boyd, who's like a day 3 pick. They've had running back Dylan LeBay out of New Hampshire, who's a day 3 running back. They've had Marshawn Nealon, who's probably a round 2 or round 3 defensive end. And you remember, top 30 visits are, by the name, limited. I mean, there's only so many that you can bring in, but we're starting to see who they are, really focusing in on. And sometimes these visits can be used to simply verify you don't want a guy, verify you do want a guy, verify what type of value. But the highest value that we've seen them bring in for a 3rd-round visit has got to be Keon Coleman. The reason Keon Coleman is interesting because that is a very potential interesting pairing with Chris Olave. I don't want to jump the gun and get too excited, but I will tell you this. He scores really well in the red zone. I like his size. The height, weight, speed argument's always there. But more importantly, I like his frame, how he uses it. But he caught only about 50-ish passes each of the past 2 years. but he's got 18 touchdowns over the past 2 years with Florida State. That's really what more of what I'm looking at. Chris Olave is going to be your number one, right? Like number one in terms of targets, who's the best, who's your focus. But Keon Coleman could be a fantastic split in for this team and really fill a role that they need filled, which is that guy who can do the intermediate cross, slants, short to intermediate, but also have the frame to body out down the field if they want to attack that way, because you have Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave who can push the field or operate short, as we've seen Shaheed really add to his playbook. We've seen Olave really develop more as years have gone on. Still think that he's got to like get this clutch gene in him and perfect it before he really takes that superstar leap, because there were just too many times where Olave had passes that a superstar would catch that he didn't. But Olave has the potential to be a superstar, and hopefully this is the year that he takes that leap. But I think Coleman could be a fantastic pairing if they decide to go after him. Only question is, when would you draft him? I personally would like Coleman in the second round, just how I would go after Michael Thomas. You know, split ends who don't appear with their tape to come into the league and probably dominate as 1,000-yard receivers are second, third round picks. Now, again, Michael Thomas was special, came in with amazing work ethic and balled out and basically pushed Brandon Cooks out the way. I don't want Keon Coleman to try to come in and press Chris Olave like that. But I mean, if they get him in the second round, I feel like that's a huge steal. I will admit, first round, I'm currently staring hard at defensive linemen and offensive linemen, because I feel like that's probably the biggest holes left on this team. But at the end of the day, you do want to address both of those positions and all the positions with best player available. I mean, that's what good teams do. So you still have moves to make this offseason. If I'm the New Orleans Saints, I believe that they still have moves to make before the draft to get ready for the draft. We'll see what that ends up looking like. They have addressed some things. I don't think Chase Young is enough, but I mean, that's a pretty big address. And again, I personally love his contract. A very much prove it cheap deal, because essentially you paid the man $5 million. And you said you can have the rest of it if you go out and play. So if he plays and if he dresses, by extension contributes, amazing. Like, please do more of these type of contracts in the future, because the potential for Chase Young, super high. But if he flames out and doesn't even play because of his neck injury or whatever, who cares? He blew $5,000. $5 million. That was be $1,000 to me. So these type of moves, I personally love the Gay contract. These type of moves, I am very, very optimistic puts New Orleans in a good spot in the future. Because what's the worst thing that happens with Chase Young? He pops off and has a 10-plus sack season that he's never had in his career, and then you have to make a decision, do you sign him or let him walk? That's a good problem to have. I'll be honest. If Chase Young manages to get 10-plus sacks, I'm going to go ahead and say you probably had a division winner right there. Because if you're Chase Young, who is on paper a number 2 rotational defensive end, comes in and gets anywhere near 10 sacks to where you'd have to worry about him getting sniped from another team, you won the division, and I'm happy. You won the division. So if he comes back and contributes in even a small way, whereas I personally want to see him in NASCAR packages where we slide Cameron Jordan inside on third down or take him off the field completely, depends on them, and then have him rushing with Carl Granderson, have a little bit more youth and power. I do want to see how healthy Cam looks in camp, because you could tell that Cam just was that half step back last year, just did not have that same eliteness that he did. And hopefully he's still got a little bit left in the tank. If nothing else, he's still an elite run defender. And, give opportunities, give snaps to Chase Young. But really, really excited about some of the moves New Orleans has made so far. That said, it ain't over. Right? Now, if y'all are wanting to keep up with the New Orleans Saints depth chart, one website that I've used for about a decade, they're not paying me to say this or anything, but just so that y'all know for yourselves, is Our Lads. They actually learned and worked with them when I was with the Scouting Academy. So been very interested to see, track player movement. And if you're curious, they actually have some special markers right now during the free agency period that you can easily spot and identify. So you can clearly see Willie Gay and Chase Young getting added to the defense, but also lets you see Nate Peterman, their new backup, which I don't even know if Nate's going to make the roster if Jake Hayner shows progression. But you also have Udo Olasamika, who they have brought in. They've also got Stanley Morgan coming through, Cedric Wilson, who we talked about, the wide receiver. So they've actually made 4 additions to the offense, 2 additions to the defense that are, big names, as well as Cedric Wilson being a punt returner. So special teams viability there. Just a website for y'all to keep up with. If you needed one, if you didn't need one, have something else that you use to track all these moves. Awesome. Absolutely fantastic. More power to you. So Calvin says, staring at Sweat at 45. Once you get past the first round, I get less picky about who the New Orleans Saints take. So that's completely okay. Should the Saints go after Simmons? So first off, which Simmons are you talking about? Because I've got 2 in mind. Which one are you referring to? If it's the one I think it is, I would say no. But that's me. Assuming you're talking about Justin Simmons. If you're not, correct me. But that would be me. I'd say no. I would say no. But I'm good with just about any move. I'll tell you this. If the move is made exactly how the Gay and Young, et cetera, contracts were, sure. Yeah, fine. My only reason to not get excited about that, is age. And like the whole point has got to be to improve the roster, right? And a guy who's going to be 31 this year, yeah, I'm kind of like where TJ's at. Like after the draft, if he's still around, pick up Simmons. But I don't want to bring him in now with the assumption that he's the starter. Like I don't want to build with that as a future. I do want to grab a couple of Antonio's questions. Thank you for supporting the channel. Who's the best quarterback in the NFC South? I mean, that's a tough one, honestly. There's not much difference between Cousins and Carr. There's not. And honestly, throw Mayfield in there because all 3 of these guys are guys that need really good offensive coordinators to elevate their game. And all 3 of them have enough innate talent to be solid starters by themselves, but never amazing. Never amazing. But you give them any of the 3. You give any of the 3 really good offensive coordinators, you're going to see a very good player. I think I would probably argue Cousins is a little bit better. Cousins is also older. He's the oldest of the 3. Sorry, Young, that I'm not including you, but you're with Carolina. Cousins maybe by a slight edge, but honestly, it's not by a lot. I mean, there's not a ton of difference between them in terms of their tape. It really comes down to how good the system they're in is, because neither of them are anywhere near the elite echelon of quarterbacks. Like they are nowhere near the Patrick Mahomes. Any of the 3 in the right perfect system can be very good players, right? I would argue that I like Carr and Cousins more than Mayfield for one reason and one reason alone: consistency. You kind of know exactly what you're getting from Carr and Cousins. And that's not a lot, but it's consistent. Whereas Baker his whole career has been very inconsistent, where I do realize that he went through a lot with Cleveland and their OC's just freaking carousel of coaching and everything. But just look at his games, right? My thing with Baker Mayfield is he had, I think, 7 games or 8 games with 1 or less TD passes. But then he had 4 TD game, a 3 TD game. And just like he would pop off and look great, but then he would have games where he just looked boo-boo. I mean, I think he had 6 games. He had either 5 or 6 games where he didn't even throw 200 yards, right? But then he'd have on the other side of that spectrum, he'd have multiple games where he threw 300 plus. And then Derek Carr, throughout his career, has been pretty consistent with what he is. And with New Orleans, you saw the offense grow, where it wasn't like he started the season just popping off, but as things progressed, you saw it get significantly better second half of the season. And that was something you saw the entire offense get better. But I don't think any of these guys are like just get excited about it. Every single one of them is a bridge quarterback. And that brings back to a big point. Hey, New Orleans Saints, if there's a quarterback you like, go get them. If the Patrick Mahomes thing has taught us anything, if you believe a quarterback is that guy, which supposedly Sean Payton did, go get him. Don't wait and hope and pray. Go get his butt. What are you waiting on? Now, Tony says, I'm surprised you haven't mentioned Ramczyk. He would change the draft strategy and make it very boring because you're just probably taking a line. So, worth mentioning, we did briefly talk about what Dennis Allen was talking about earlier, but he did talk about Ryan Ramczyk this past week. The short of it was he's not worried right now. He's optimistic, but he did say that the Ramczyk has not healed to the speed that he personally is hoping for, but also said that it's March and he's not worried about it right now. Now, I'm curious how that plays into their draft strategy, because if he's not ready now or he's not healed now, he definitely can be 6 months from now. He's got literally half a year before he needs to start football games. So the time is definitely there for the healing to happen. However, if you are concerned that it's not happening quick enough, that can absolutely affect how you approach this year's draft, which means offensive lines are on the table, but good thing for me. I love offensive line draft picks. In fact, I think that that's some of the best things that you can do. To spend first and second round picks on offensive linemen. Really do. I know not everybody likes that, but that's just how I am. Great example, Amarius Mims out of Georgia. Rams not ready. Mims is ready. Go grab him. Have at it. Enjoy. Now, you don't have to like that particular player. That's fine. That's fine. He's a guy that I would try to nab day 2. I really would. Even though he's got limited starts. I mean, his tape is good. Whoever is your guy, though, yeah, make that move. But there's your Ryan Ramczyk update. Paul says, I hope that Jake Haener doesn't have to play because we're screwed. I have nothing negative to say about Jake Haener. So, Calvin says, Mims, another injury-riddled guy. Wouldn't take him in the first, but at 45. Again, I said second round. But yeah, I would absolutely. I mean, because his upside's insane, right? Upside's incredible. If he never plays, oh well. Jake needs a better HGH dealer. I don't think that's legal, TJ, but sure. Our brand new New Orleans resident model, he needs what he really needs. The Pelicans to beat the Thunder tonight. But what he really needs is more HGH. Clearly, that's what he's lacking. If we had more HGH, he would be better as a player. Absolutely. Let's just pinning inside. I still don't get why people want to move pinning inside. Doesn't make any sense to me. Very curious to see what the New Orleans Saints do. Still don't make any sense to me. Moving him inside doesn't help him in any way, because if he continues to have the problems that he's having, that just makes him the hole at left guard rather than left tackle. But if he really isn't ready now, I would just go ahead and get rid of him. To be honest, I'd keep him this year as your backup, play out his rookie contract, and move on. So, yeah. I just don't. And again, I've said this very openly. This is how I was taught. So I'm not trying to push that my paradigm on this is the right answer. I'm just sitting there saying that I don't see it as the right answer. And if he simply isn't the guy, you'll know this year. And then you just let him be a quality backup. And then after his rookie year, you let him go. That's just what I would do. You know, I'm. Are you taking Bowers or the tackle out of Penn State if they're both available at 14? First off, how dare you be disrespectful? How dare you be disrespectful? Can't even say the man's name. I think for me is I tend to err on the side of the New Orleans Saints history. What I mean by that? With the Saints, they love their great RAS scores, right? And we've seen that for a long time. Personally, if we're talking just pure, I don't believe he'll be there, but if Ashuna from Penn State is there, he's number one. I think he's probably number one. It depends on who you personally think is number one. Put whoever you want. I really like him. I think that he's got very high-end starter ability, right? If you want to go a different direction, completely okay. There are probably 6 different players that I've got like in a little bubble right now that I'm okay with. Now, I will come in and say this. Bowers is not somebody I would take in the first round. And I know not everybody who just heard me say that is going to agree. I would not take Bowers in the first round. What is my logic for not taking Bowers in the first round? I'll tell you. Because when I look at Bowers, do I see someone as good as Kyle Pitts? Maybe, honestly. Maybe. And then I come back to this. Was Kyle Pitts worth a first-round pick? And my answer is no. So I honestly don't know if I can say Bowers is better than Pitts coming out of college. Both very good. Would I spend the pick 14 on him? Absolutely not. I would trade back. Let somebody else get him, right? Now, that doesn't mean there isn't situations where a tight end can be a good pick. Take a look at the rookie tight end who just broke every record in the world for rookie tight ends. Shout out to him. He was taken in the second round, pick 34, which is, very close to being a first-round pick, but it's a second-round pick. I would not spend a first-round pick, especially a mid-round pick, on a tight end. If I'm picking a tight end in the first round, it better be towards the very end of the first round, and I believe he's a generational talent. I just don't think tight end as a position provides the value needed for that unless you can just straight up tell me to my face that he's Jimmy Graham. But not only Jimmy Graham, he's Jimmy Graham today. And if you can tell me that, maybe, honestly. When I say Jimmy Graham, I'm talking about like all Pro Bowl. Basically, I'm saying if you could tell me that I could get Sam Laporta exactly how his rookie year turned out, which was like 900 yards and 10 TDs, I would take that at the end of the first round. I'd take that at the end of the first. That's it. I would not take that in a top 15 pick. I just wouldn't. Because a top 15 pick would be me saying Brock Bowers has the same value as Chris Olave. He does not. In my opinion. Chris Olave is a top 15 pick worthy talent. A 2 straight year 1,000-yard receiver who, with better quarterback play in year 1 especially, but also year 2 and better OC play, probably has more than the 9 touchdowns he currently has because for whatever reason they decided to stop going after their playmaker in scoring situations, even though he was very good in these situations in, college. Ignore the past 30 seconds of me rambling. Is he better than that? No, absolutely not. So I would not put a top 15 pick on it. I would go for the Penn State tackle. So we'll do a 4 5th-round picks in your opinion. Probably trade them for a 4th or, combination of things to get a 3rd-round pick. Don says, there's no way I take a tight end at 14. Falcons blew a pick on Pitts, and nobody has seen a tight end draft prospect that good in a long time. I've seen some really good tight end picks, and I'm not in any way trying to besmirch Bowers, but I don't believe Bowers comes in the NFL and has 1,200 yards and 10 TDs. Sam Laporta literally just broke rookie tight end records, and he didn't even have 1,000 yards. And I'm not trying to in any way say that I will gladly take a 10 TD tight end. But even him, he didn't come in and have 100 receptions. He didn't come in and lead the league in receiving TDs. He didn't come in and have 1,000 yards. But he's still amazing. I mean, frick, give me Sam Laporta. I just wouldn't put a top 15 pick on. Because if things are drafted, quote unquote, right, like you do your job and everything falls into place and the guy that you drafted fits your team, et cetera, you should get better value than a 900 receiving yard, 10 TD tight end at pick 14. You should. Doesn't mean you will, but you should, right? Should. Big word. Big word. There are plenty of, misses every single draft. And misses happen for various reasons, right? I would say most misses happen due to not the player, but the situation they go to or situations that affect the player. An example of what I'm talking about is, let's go back to, say, the 2017 draft, right? A big draft. Saints fans love it. I would say a guy like, I'm trying to think of a big name from that draft who kind of a letdown. I would say like Derek Barnett. Derek Barnett was a 14th pick in that draft. I think Derek Barnett is a better player than his career in Philly would show. But the problem with that is he got drafted into a situation where, sure, I do think he was talented. I mean, the dude had 5 sacks his rookie season. Then he got injured next year. But that Phillies D-line has been stacked for a long time. And they just kept loading it with more and more stacked players. Like Philly has just been doing really good at offensive and defensive line play for a while now, right? And that doesn't mean that like a guy shouldn't develop and get better. I'm not saying that argument, but like Brandon Graham, the veteran, was right there in the middle of that, right? And then you had Vinny Curry, great veteran there, getting sacks. You had Josh Sweat. You had Fletcher Cox, in his prime when you got Barnett. I realized that Fletcher Cox a 3-tech. We're talking about just the ability to get on the field and have an impact and become a starter. Situation can affect you. I don't think Derek Barnett's a bad player. I think Derek Barnett has had what a lot of fans would say is a successful career, just not a great career. As a 14th overall pick, disappointing. But the dude has had, I think, 4 seasons where he had 5 sacks or more, where he actually did get to have start time, did get to start working into that rotation more often. And maybe it didn't work out to the degree of success you wanted to, but he came into a very difficult situation. Whereas maybe a better situation where he did have more time to actually work on his craft and be the guy and be thrown to the fire, maybe he does better. Or maybe he doesn't. But that would be one where you say is a letdown, but also situation maybe affected that one. And if you don't think that's a great example, well, then there's a heck of a lot of other examples. Like, I was going to mention the massage guy, but I'm going to leave the massage guy alone. I'm going to leave the massage guy alone. But I mean, even from then, like Evan Ingram, another tight end. I remember from that 2017 draft, though, Evan Ingram was a quality, and I would argue still is a quality tight end because he did make the Pro Bowl last year with Jacksonville. He is yet to have a 1,000-yard season ever. He's got 24 career touchdowns. I would argue the situation he got drafted into is he got drafted to New York, the Giants, and not even like a good Giants team. A bad Giants team, a 3-13 Giants team led by Steve Spagnuolo. He got drafted to a really bad team. Yet, it took him 4 years, made the Pro Bowl, and now he's made the Pro Bowl with a second team. Had he started with a better situation, could Evan Ingram have been a better player? Yeah, probably. But situation. So, anyway, a little bit of a mini tangent there. I think if you're New Orleans, big key is please don't draft another another defensive end with injury histories. That's really all my gripe is. Don't do that. And if we don't do that, then we're probably pretty good. But anyway, y'all, I've had a great time. Y'all are amazing. You're all wonderful. We're right under an hour already, and it's amazing how much time flies. But we will be back for another episode. Hope you're enjoying it. Share this out with your friends and family and other Hoodats around the world. Hoodat, God bless. I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you, Antonio, by the way, for supporting the channel and donating. It's very, very kind of you to do while we're streaming. Join the Discord if you haven't already, and I will catch you on the next episode where more will be discussed.